the sky roared as heavy rain poured down on the muddy village road. In the middle of that road stood an old broken truck, its engine dead, while water streamed down its rusted body. The owner looked worried, but beneath the truck, one man worked with silent determination. That man was Rashid, the poor mechanic. His clothes were soaked, his shellwork kameez clung to his body, and his hands were covered in grease and mud. His face was tired, his eyes weary, but there was still a stubborn fire in them, the fire of survival. For Rashid, this wasn't just about fixing a truck. It was about putting food on the table. He knew if he failed to earn today, there would be less bread at home tonight. And at home, there was only one face waiting for him, his beloved daughter, Aisha. Raindrops dripped onto the open engine, hissing as they met hot metal. Rashid tightened the bolts with his old, rusty tools. He wiped the rain from his forehead with the back of his greasy hand. People passing by glanced at him. Some looked at him with pity, whispering, "Poor man, working even in the rain." Others mocked, "This is what happens when you're born with nothing." But Rashid didn't hear them. His mind was filled with only one thought. I can get tired, but I cannot stop. My daughter's smile is my strength. On that stormy night, in the pouring rain, Rashid fought with stubborn bolts and a stubborn fate, just a father, willing to face the whole world, if only it meant a better tomorrow for his child. The mechanic finally returned home, dripping wet from the rain. His worn-out sandals squished against the floor as he stepped inside their dimly lit house. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked walls. His wife sat at the old wooden table, her face buried in her hands, crying softly. Her tears mixed with the sound of the rain still pounding outside. At the corner, his old father sat in shock, his frail hands trembling against his walking stick. His mother, pale and shaken, looked on silently as if the world around her had collapsed. But the loudest sound in that poor home was not the rain, it was the voice of an angry man shouting. The wealthy groom's father had come, his voice full of arrogance and venom. "You think your daughter deserves to marry into our family? Look at your house. Look at your clothes. You're nothing but a mechanic." Rashid stood there, rainwater dripping from his hair and clothes, his chest heaving with both exhaustion and humiliation. His fists tightened, but he said nothing. In the corner of the room, his little daughter Aisha stood silently, clutching her doll. Her wide, innocent eyes took in the scene, the shouting man, her crying mother, her powerless father. She didn't cry. She just watched, her small heart breaking without words. In that single moment, the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm raging inside their home. That night, silence filled the poor home. The rain had slowed, but the air was still heavy with tension and unspoken pain. Rashid sat on the floor, his head bowed, his clothes still damp. His wife quietly wiped her tears, while his daughter clung to her doll, too frightened to sleep. Suddenly, knock. 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 The sound of a firm hand striking the wooden door echoed through the small house. Everyone froze. The mother looked up in shock. The wife gasped, whispering, "Who could it be at this hour?" Rashid's tired eyes flicked toward the door, suspicion rising in his chest. His fists tightened instinctively. Slowly, the door creaked open. Standing there was a well-dressed stranger, his coat neat, shoes polished, face serious. His presence looked completely out of place in this poor home. The wife's eyes widened with surprise, as if she had seen hope itself knock on their door. The old mother's lips trembled in disbelief. The husband of the crying wife, still furious from the earlier humiliation, stood up with anger, shouting, "What business do you have here? We want nothing from outsiders." And Rashid, he felt a wave of unease. His heart beat faster, his mind whispering, "Why would someone like him come here, to us, in the middle of the night?" The stranger looked around the room, then fixed his gaze on Rashid. His voice was calm, but carried weight. "I am here for you," he said. And with those words, the fate of this poor mechanic's family was about to change forever. The small living room felt heavier than ever. The flickering bulb above cast sharp shadows across the cracked walls, making every expression harsher, every sound louder. The husband, red with rage, stood over his wife, shouting angrily. His voice echoed in the poor house, each word like a slap in the air. The wife trembled, her eyes filled with fear and shame, unable to answer. In that chaos, the stranger leaned closer to her, his voice a whisper meant only for her ears. His words were secret, dangerous, and filled with something no one else in the room could hear. The wife's eyes widened, her breath quickened, she was torn between fear and shock. Suddenly. Crash! A glass slipped from trembling hands and shattered on the floor, scattering shards across the dirt-stained tiles. The sound silenced the room for a moment, but only for a moment. In the corner, the old mother clutched the child tightly in her arms, as if to shield her from the storm inside the home. The little girl buried her face into her grandmother's shawl, trying not to hear the shouting, the whispers, the breaking. And outside, in the dark night, the mechanic father sat alone, leaning against the broken wall. A cigarette burned slowly between his fingers, the smoke curling upward into the damp night sky. He stared into the distance, his face tired, his heart heavy. Alone in the rain's aftermath, he carried the weight of silence, the silence of a man who had no answers, only questions. The air inside the crowded courtroom was thick with tension. Wooden benches creaked as villagers and city folk alike filled every seat, whispering among themselves. At the front, the judge sat high on the bench, his gavel resting firmly in hand, his sharp eyes scanning the room. To the left, the wife sat beside the lawyer, tears streaming down her face. Her hands trembled, but her lawyer leaned close, whispering words of courage. She wiped her eyes, trying to hold herself together before the entire hall. On the other side, the husband sat nervously, his arrogance gone. Sweat rolled down his temples as he shifted uncomfortably, tapping his fingers on the table. Every eye seemed to pierce him, every whisper seemed to accuse him. At the very back, the mechanic father, Rashid, sat quietly. His face carried no expression, but his silence was louder than words. He was not part of the arguments, not part of the shouting, he was simply waiting, watching, hoping that truth would finally speak for itself. And then, the stranger stepped forward. Well-dressed, confident, and with a steady voice, he stood in the witness box. All eyes turned to him. "I have seen the lies," he declared. "And today, I will reveal the truth." The courtroom fell silent, the moment hanging in the air like thunder before a storm. Night fell over the city, its streets glowing with neon lights and flickering shop signs. The rain had left the roads shining like mirrors, reflecting colors of red, blue, and gold. There, beneath the buzz of a neon sign, the wife stood tall. Her tears of the past replaced by strength. Her eyes burned with determination as she faced her shocked husband, who now looked pale, his arrogance stripped away. In his trembling hands, he had nothing. No power. No defense. Only fear. Beside her, the stranger held a folder of secret documents, evidence that could destroy the husband completely. His grip was firm, his expression cold, as if justice itself had taken human form. From the shadows across the street, the mechanic father, Rashid, watched silently. The smoke of his last cigarette curled in the night air. He didn't step forward, he didn't speak, but his presence was there, like the unshakable witness of truth. The husband's lips trembled as he whispered, "This can't be happening." But it was. His world was collapsing right in front of him. The wife, once broken and humiliated, now stood like fire in the neon glow. She looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Your lies end here." And in that single moment, the city's lights seemed to shine brighter, as if the night itself had chosen sides. The courtroom was silent, every ear straining for the final words. The judge's gavel slammed down with thunderous force, echoing against the wooden walls. "Guilty," the judge declared, his voice ringing with finality. "For corruption, fraud, and betrayal of trust, you are sentenced." Gasps spread through the crowd. The once proud husband collapsed in his chair, his face pale, his hands trembling. Guards moved swiftly, gripping his arms as he struggled weakly, disbelief painted across his face. At the front, the mechanic's wife stood tall, her body shaking with emotion. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of victory. She had endured humiliation, fear, and despair, but now, justice had given her back her dignity. Beside her, the stranger held up the final stack of evidence, documents that had sealed the corrupt man's fate. His voice had been steady, his testimony sharp as a blade, and now his job was done. At the back of the courtroom, Rashid, the poor mechanic father, rose slowly. His rough hands reached out, and his daughter ran into his arms. He hugged her tightly, burying his face in her hair, his heart finally at peace. For the first time in years, he felt relief, pure, undeniable relief. The courtroom guards led the shocked husband away, his shouts fading into silence. The people whispered, justice had been served. And in that heavy silence, one truth remained clear. Money and pride had fallen, but honesty and patience had won.